So I work with Hayes Farm, and we are a project of NB Community Harvest Gardens. And we're basically we've kind of positioned ourselves in the education lens. So that organization started out with a couple community gardens, and they're both absolutely flourishing right now. They're both on the north side of Fredericton. But my role is with the Hayes Farm specifically. So the Hayes Farm is a working community farm right in the residential neighborhood on the north side of Fredericton. And we're a working farm, so we run programming mainly through the summer that teaches crop production skills, and it's very community oriented. So we try and engage all kinds of different people, whether it's through formal programming or informal programming, or informal engagement, whether it's volunteering or people just dropping into our sections when they're able. But we really focus on that education piece and food sovereignty. So advocating that people very much play a role in their food system and the food that they're able to access. Not, of course, having enough food is of the utmost importance, but taking a step beyond that and really kind of getting involved in the food system. And it's a very, very layered system. Of course, there's lots of components to it in terms of food production, food accessibility, what you eat and how it's grown, and it's how it gets to you. And there's all these layers that stack and certainly are affected by and have effects on climate.
Awesome answer, thank you. So what examples of climate change have you witnessed in New Brunswick? And in your opinion, what is the greatest unmet climate need in New Brunswick?
I think when I was going over the questions earlier today, I think that the examples of climate change are so in our faces right now. Even thinking about the last month, I mean, the fact that it's the end of January and we've had basically one snow. So it's been a super dry, I guess, and a lot of our precipitation has come as rain this winter too. A Christmas, 2020 Christmas that I think was 16 degrees. These things are I don't know. I mean, I am very much agriculturally minded, so the weather is like very, very top of mind for me. I mean, weather's on everybody's radar all the time, but
sorry to cut you off, but do you think that'll affect your growing season? Like, how do you see that moving into your growing season?
Yeah, for sure. And like a couple other examples I was going to mention were flooding, but also drought and early or late frosts, and it's really the unpredictable weather patterns. So I don't think our last frost was too late this past growing season, but I remember in 2019 there was a super late frost in June, and especially fruit producers like apples and strawberries, I think, were really super hard hit because all of their crops were in bloom, and then they got this super late frost, and it, of course, impacts their production. So things like that make it really difficult to plan and to produce, especially when you're looking to do it, to grow things and to do agriculture in a way that is climate friendly. There's all kinds of, you can grow all kinds of stuff in super controlled climate ways, but they have a lot of they're really intensive, like they're demanding in terms of resources that you need to do those kind of production in that way. So when you're doing production on the scale that we do at Hayes Farm, so it's very human scale, and we try and use as little mechanization and fossil fuels as possible, but we're also super conscious about plastic use, and so we try and limit the amount of plastic that we use starting seedlings in the spring, but also in the fields as well. So when that weather is really unpredictable, and being a small grower, you're in one sense more adaptable because you are small scale, but there tends to be, there's a lot of kind of value decisions. Yeah, so when you're growing on a small scale, and really a lot of small growers do tend to be very climate conscious. So you often have maybe fewer tools or equipment that can help you kind of weather those intense events. So the unpredictability of, when your season starts or when it's safe to put things in the ground, or that the fall is a little bit easier because we're used to, a frost in maybe October. But if you lose things a little bit early, at least you've hopefully gotten some of the crop out of the ground. But I think growers would probably argue on either side. It's difficult if something happens that you're not expecting. Yeah. And so the unmet climate need. I find that a bit of a tricky question, but I think education. I think that's the only way that I can think of to answer that question. And more engagement, so that people do see how they fit in. Of course, from my perspective as a small grower and working with Hayes Farm, the local food aspect is, I think about it all day, every day, and I think that there's components of that do play pretty heavy or are affected by, and again affect climate, because there's the distribution model. I think since there's been recently 2 local food and beverage strategy documents for New Brunswick. So there's one just released about a week ago. And the newest stat in terms of the percentage that New Brunswick is self-sufficient in fruit, or not fruit, but in vegetables, is 7%, 6% maybe, which is a pretty stark, it's a pretty low number. But the report prior to that, which was in 2016, the figure was 8%. So we've even slipped, further down and are less self-sufficient than we were 4 years ago. We're optimistic about that strategy and what actions and policies hopefully will come out of it. But yeah, I guess to bring it back to that climate and local food, I think being aware of this seasonality and of what you are eating and what your diet is like, and how that reflects on the climate.
Do you think that the climate is the reason we're becoming less self-sufficient, or do you think there's some other external force kind of leaning in there?
I think it's really hard to look at any factor as being standalone.
Totally.
I would probably, that's an interesting question. I think that probably yes. I think there's definitely some correlation there. I think I say up north, but where we are compared to California, Mexico, Florida, where a lot of our food does get imported from. Our growing season is getting longer. I think the growing zones are kind of divided into, it's like zones, I might get this wrong, but like 1 through 10. Basically, zone 1 is way up north, where you have like maybe 20 days of growing season, where like the higher number you have, it's basically you can grow year round. And so we've typically been at like a 4 or a 4B and we've gone up like a whole number because of how the environment and the climate is changing. And so that basically tells us that our growing season is getting reliably longer, even though it is still unpredictable. I mean, climates everywhere are becoming less predictable. So I think those growers or those corporations or whatever the model is that has the capacity to micromanage their systems, I think that they're gaining more, probably gaining more of the market.
So, what does Hayes Farm need the most help with currently in relation to climate change? And what can community members do to make a difference and contribute to the fight against climate change, whether at Hayes Farms or in all of New Brunswick?
Yeah, I think policies have a lot of power and carry a lot of weight. So government policies that dictate how money is spent and how activities happen, but also on an organizational level, policies that are in place on how businesses are run, or organizational mandates and how things are carried out. We have, like I mentioned, a lot of optimism for what the local food and beverage strategy will determine, like what it will kind of not dictate, but help reorient things. So one thing that we really recognize as a need, in terms of our work at Hayes Farm, we do a lot of seasonal hands-on training. So our programming basically runs between April and November. And then, we really hope that after going through our program that people do feel engaged and want to pursue agriculture in some capacity. But the one thing that we're realizing we're lacking is the support for our alumni and for our grads. So when somebody goes to a program and they're ready then to start their own operation, it's difficult to, even though there's so much land out there, it's difficult to make the connections, know who to call, where to find funding, and those pieces. So especially programs or support to help farm succession. So from folks that are getting out of farming for whatever reason, whether it's age or inability to continue on for whatever reason, to help transition that to somebody who is ready to get into farming or to grow their operation. Yeah, and in terms of, so one thing that we need at a farm level is we've been doing a lot of kind of over the past few years research in terms of how to better manage water. So we had a fourth-year university group do like a full farm overview and propose a water management plan for us. And this was actually before we had any crops in the ground. So it was very, very preliminary, but there's the aspects of water that exists in the ground and is always moving through the ground. There's rainwater catchment, the use of municipal water, and irrigation systems. So it may not be answering your question directly, but a need to really understand that and develop a system that doesn't negatively impact, I don't think climate is appropriate here, but like our farm environment, our farm ecosystem. It's not, I don't think there needs to be a ton of pressure to understand everything. I by no means understand like this most minuscule portion of what's happening and why it's happening. But I'm interested and I'm passionate, and I've found things that that I feel I can do that make a difference. So I think for on an individual basis to find something that you can invest in or like commit to, but also on the flip side, like considering what you can divest from or give up. And if that involves joining us at Hayes Farm in any capacity, that's super great. We, as a nonprofit, you know, the funding is always a very difficult pattern. You know, we don't have core funding, so every year we're in this scramble of trying really hard and crossing our fingers and hoping that we can continue activities for the next year. So yeah, supporting whether you can do something, you know, whether an individual can do something directly, or if, you know, you just feel like you don't have the capacity, but you recognize that there's this person doing this really awesome thing, or this group doing this, something that you really believe in, like show your support. In whether it's verbal, whether it's showing up to a volunteer day or giving some money. I think just yeah, taking a step towards something that you know is good or feel is good, or taking a step back from something that you recognize as being negative.
That is awesome advice. Thank you very much. You've pretty much answered all of my questions, but I was wondering if community members did want to get involved at Hayes Farms or volunteer, how could they reach out and do that? And you had mentioned going through a program there. What does that look like, and how do people get involved?
Awesome. We're just pulling together the last bits of information to start our recruitment for our summer programs. So we have we're going back to offering 2 streams this year. So one is, it's an 18-week program. So it's basically this kind of spring summer growing season. And it goes from end of April to end of August. And that is the regenerative farming summer internship. So it focuses a lot, there's a ton of field, you know, in field time. And so it focuses a lot on annual crop production with a very regenerative environmental kind of community focus. And because of, you know, the size and the feel of our farm, there's all kinds of different aspects that the interns will be involved in. So it's not just row production, but we also have a hoop house. We're introducing lots of perennials. Like I mentioned, the water management, that's a big and ongoing project. There's some construction or carpentry aspects. We want to run a food box program through the summer, so there's lots of engagement and involvement in that. And then we have a full season program that we're bringing back this year. So it's the regenerative farming full internship, and that essentially the first section is concurrent with the other one. So it runs April through the end of November, and that includes everything that I just mentioned. But in addition, some farm business planning. So for those folks that are really, really keen to kind of dig their heels in and invest, you know, put some time into agriculture and maybe start their own operation or manage a farm or another community farm operation, it's a really great intensive opportunity and experience there. And so that does, it really gives the full season picture of what it's like on a small farm. So from the late spring through all the summer crops, then also the fall and storage crops, and closing up the garden for the winter. So they're really hands-on. There's also classroom components. So we've been doing our classes online, of course. And that is a lot of opportunity to talk about the theoretical aspects and kind of history and context, but also a lot of time for discussion. So they're really they're really well-rounded programs. We've got excellent instructors, and we've got spots opening up. Applications are going to be open very soon for 20 interns this fall.
Awesome. Thank you so much for this interview. This has been super informative to me, and I've really enjoyed kind of hearing everything that you have to say.